Too hard, something to push back.
What happens next is my favorite part.
Something shifted in this episode, and not in a way that feels like the show is just moving pieces around the board. It feels like the man in yellow has been quietly setting everything up this entire time, and episode 4 is the moment where you start to realize just how far ahead of everybody else he actually is. The town has always had this sense of dread hanging over it, but this episode made that dread feel personal. It made it feel targeted. Like the man in yellow isn't just existing in this town and feeding off the fear of the people within it. He has a plan. A very specific, very calculated plan. And what's terrifying about it is that the people he's chosen to be a part of that plan don't even know they're already in it. Sarah doesn't know. Boyd doesn't know. And Julie, who just walked into arguably the most horrifying thing she could have ever witnessed, is only just beginning to scratch the surface of what this town truly is and what it's truly capable of. This episode filled in gaps, answered some questions, and opened up a whole new wave of things to think about going forward. So let's get into it. Here is from Season 4, Episode 4, Ending Explained. What this episode did better than almost any other this season is that it gave us a window into how the man in yellow actually operates. And the more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Because he isn't just a monster that feeds and destroys. He's patient, he's methodical, and he understands people in a way that makes him genuinely dangerous beyond just the physical threat that he poses. The move with Sophia this episode was the clearest example of that. With Sophia now living with Sarah following the previous episode, this one wasted no time in starting to show us the shape of what the man in yellow is actually building towards and what his interest in Sarah really is. The moment that stood out immediately was when Sarah knocked on the door and Sophia switched. 1 second she was the man in yellow, and the next she was Sophia, warm and present and completely convincing. And then, the moment Sarah left, she switched straight back. What that told us is that the persona he's adopted, the version of Sophia that the people in the town are interacting with, doesn't come naturally to him. It's a performance. It takes active effort and conscious thought to maintain it. And the fact that we're seeing those cracks, even briefly, suggests that keeping it up over time is going to become harder. That detail alone is something worth keeping in mind as the season continues. Because if the mask starts slipping around the wrong person at the wrong moment, everything changes. But the really significant part of this episode when it comes to the man in yellow and Sarah was the voices. Sarah's voices came back. And what we found out is that it's actually the man in yellow who is responsible for them. He's the one putting them inside her head. He's the one who has been speaking to her through them. And when you sit with that for a moment, it completely reframes everything we thought we knew about Sarah's arc and the torment she's been going through. Because this whole time, she hasn't just been struggling with her own mind. She's been struggling with him. He's been in there, quietly pulling at things, testing her, seeing what she does. And that tells us something enormous about what the man in yellow actually is in the context of this town. Because being able to put thoughts and voices into someone's mind isn't just a trick or an ability. It points to him being the higher power that the town runs on, the all-knowing, all-controlling force behind everything that happens within it. And Sophia referencing a higher power to Mariel, even whilst being outside and away from that conversation, only reinforced that. Because Sophia knew. She always knows. She's an extension of him, and through her, he sees and hears everything. The task that the voices gave Sarah in this episode was deliberately small, deliberately insignificant. They told her to pour water from the jug in the diner, take a sip, and pour it back. That was it. No grand gesture, no dangerous act, just a simple, pointless task. And that's exactly what made it so clever. Because Sarah battled with it. She went back and forth. She thought about the progress she'd made, the trust she'd rebuilt with the people in the town, the sense of belonging she'd finally started to feel again after everything she'd been through. And she chose not to do it. She chose herself over the voice. And then Sophia walked outside and threw herself into the pool and broke her arm. Not because Sarah caused it, but because Sophia could see and hear in real time that Sarah hadn't completed the task. And she did it to herself deliberately to force Sarah's hand. That moment showed just how total Sophia's awareness is. She doesn't need to be in the room. She doesn't need to be told. She just knows. And she's willing to hurt herself to keep the plan moving forward. Sarah ran back in and completed the task, and that was all he needed. That single moment of compliance was the whole point. It was never about the water. It was never about the jug. It was about seeing whether Sarah would listen when the voices told her to do something. It was about establishing that she could be reached through them and that when pressure was applied, she would fold. And she did. Which means he now knows that she's his. Not because she's evil or because she wants to be, but because she's in a position where she feels like the consequences of not listening are worse than the act of listening. And that's an incredibly dangerous place to be in when the man in yellow is the one deciding what the next task is going to be. Because it's not always going to be pouring water back into a jug. The tasks are going to get bigger. They're going to get darker. And by the time Sarah realizes what she's actually agreeing to, it might already be too late to pull back. The parallel to the story of Abraham in the Bible felt completely intentional here. God tasking Abraham with killing his own son wasn't about whether Abraham would actually go through with it. It was about devotion. It was about obedience. It was a test of whether Abraham was truly loyal. And Abraham passed. And Sarah just passed the same kind of test. The man in yellow now knows she's a willing participant. He knows she'll listen. And with the town moving in cycles and the boy in white having already told Tabitha that time is running out, the feeling that something catastrophic is on the horizon is becoming harder and harder to ignore. The slaughtering that happened all those years ago, the one that Victor lived through as a child, feels like it's coming around again. And Sarah, without even knowing it, may already be positioned to play a role in it. There is something about Julie's storyline this season that feels different to everything else happening in the town. Every other character is reacting to the town. They're surviving it, being broken down by it, being manipulated by it. But Julie is doing something that nobody else has really managed to do in the same way. She's learning. She's actively trying to understand the mechanics of this place and use them to her advantage. And episode 4 took that further than it's gone before, because Julie didn't just story walk this episode. She walked straight into the worst possible version of this town's history and came face to face with the man in yellow at his most terrifying. But before we get to what she saw, it's worth understanding what she was actually trying to do and why it matters so much going forward. Julie's whole approach to story walking has been shaped by the book Adventures of the Grand Guyog and the character of Fred the Storywalker within it. Fred was somebody who could move through different chapters of a story, different periods of time. And the way he kept himself anchored and was able to return to specific moments was through bookmarks. He would leave something behind in a time period, and that bookmark would act as his way of finding his way back there. Julie took that idea and tried to apply it to what she's been experiencing. She wrote a symbol on a piece of paper, dropped it in the time period she walked into, and believed that when she returned with it in her pocket, it would confirm that the bookmark had worked and that she had a way of going back there whenever she needed to. When she came back and the symbol wasn't on the piece of paper, she assumed it hadn't worked. She assumed the whole thing had failed. But I don't think that's actually what happened. And I think the show is being deliberately careful here about the difference between something not working and somebody not yet knowing how to use it properly. Because Julie is still in the early stages of figuring all of this out, she's working from a fictional book and trying to map its logic onto something that is very real and operating by its own rules. The fact that the symbol wasn't there doesn't necessarily mean the bookmark doesn't exist. It might just mean that the bookmark works differently to how she expected it to. Rather than the symbol appearing back on the paper in her pocket as confirmation, maybe the bookmark is already there, waiting at that specific point in time. And the way back isn't through the paper showing her the symbol. The way back might be through her remembering which symbol she used and using that as the key to return there. Think about what that would mean practically. If each symbol she writes connects to a specific period of time, then essentially what she's building without fully realizing it yet is a kind of map. A personal reference system where each symbol is a doorway to a different moment in the town's history. But for that to work, she needs to keep track of which symbol she leaves where, because without that knowledge, she has the doors but no way of knowing which one leads where. It's going to take her time to figure that out, and the show seems to be enjoying letting that process unfold gradually, rather than handing her the answers all at once. Which is the right call, because watching Julie piece this together in real time is genuinely one of the most engaging threads the show has had in a while. Now, where she actually walked to in this episode is where things get truly dark. Because Julie didn't land somewhere safe or somewhere neutral in the town's history. She walked directly into the period where the man in yellow had just finished slaughtering the town's people. And she saw him in the immediate aftermath of that, covered in blood, feeding. And the thing that made that moment so deeply unsettling wasn't just the visual of it, as haunting as that was. It was his expression. Or rather, the absence of one. There was nothing there. No awareness of what he'd done. No reaction to the scale of the destruction around him. Just a blank, empty focus on feeding. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like the people he'd just destroyed were nothing more than a meal. And that blankness is somehow more frightening than rage would have been, because rage you can understand. Rage has emotion behind it. What the man in yellow showed in that moment had nothing behind it at all. The gray tone in his skin was another detail worth paying attention to, because compared to how we've seen him in the Season 3 finale and the Season 4 premiere, he looked different, colder, more drained. And it raises an interesting question about what feeding actually does for him, and what happens when he hasn't fed in a while. Because if his skin loses color when he isn't feeding, then Sophia starting to look different could be an early warning sign that she's getting hungry. And if she's getting hungry, that means the version of Sophia that's been carefully managing her relationships with Sarah and the others in the town might start to crack in ways that go beyond just the brief switches we saw in this episode. That's something to keep a very close eye on as the season moves forward. The look on the man in yellow's face when he noticed Julie was also revealing in its own way. Because it wasn't the look of something that felt threatened. It was concern, almost panic. And that reaction tells us that Julie seeing him in that state, in that moment, in that time period, is something he didn't want to happen. It matters to him that she saw it. And the reason it matters is almost certainly connected to the progress she's making with story walking. Because if Julie is getting better at moving through time, and she's starting to witness the things that the man in yellow has done, and the cycles that the town has been through, then she becomes a threat to the carefully constructed reality that he maintains for the people living within it. She's pulling back the curtain, and he knows it. What Julie witnessed also recontextualizes something that has always been quietly heartbreaking about Victor. Because what she walked into is exactly what Victor lived through as a child. He didn't just hear about it or see the aftermath. He was there. He saw the man in yellow in that same state, feeding, and he saw him doing it to his own mother. And now with Julie having seen it too, that image has a weight to it that it didn't fully have before. It explains everything about Victor. It explains why the sight of a yellow jacket sends him into a complete state of panic. It explains the drawings. It explains the trauma that has never left him, no matter how much time has passed. He's been carrying that image his entire life in this town. And Henry's reaction when he saw the drawings this episode was telling, because it was the reaction of someone seeing something genuinely horrifying for the first time. Which is exactly what it was. The wider significance of Julie seeing this moment in the town's history is that the cycle is nearly complete again. The boy in white told Tabitha that time was running out. Victor told us that the man in yellow arrived once before in a car, just like everybody else, convinced everyone he was one of them, built trust, and then one day turned. And that is exactly what is playing out right now with Sophia. The pattern is identical, which means what Julie saw in that time period isn't just history. It's a preview of what's coming. And the town is running out of time before it arrives. There are characters in this show that the plot needs and characters that you genuinely feel something for. And Fatima has always sat in this slightly uncomfortable middle ground where the show clearly wants you to care about her deeply, but hasn't always given you quite enough to fully get there. This episode tried to change that, and to its credit, it did move things forward with her in a way that felt meaningful. Because what Fatima is going through right now isn't just grief or fear in the conventional sense. It's something more specific and more disturbing than that. She doesn't just feel haunted by what happened with Smiley, she feels connected to it. Like a thread was tied between them when she carried that thing, and no matter how much distance she puts between herself and that experience, the thread is still there and it's still pulling. That connection is what drove everything she did in this episode. Fatima believes that she can feel exactly what Smiley is feeling, not in a vague emotional sense, but in a direct, real, present tense way. She knows when he's afraid. She knows when he's content. And most disturbingly of all, she knows when he's enjoying something. And what he's been enjoying is her fear. He can feel it coming through that connection just as clearly as she can feel him, and he's taking pleasure in it. Which means every moment that Fatima spends being afraid of him is a moment that feeds something in him. Every time the fear rises in her, he feels it and it satisfies him in some way. And knowing that makes the fear even harder to shake, because now it isn't just an emotional response to trauma, it's a transaction, and he's on the receiving end of it every single time. So Fatima made a decision. Rather than sitting inside that fear and letting it continue to feed whatever connection exists between them, she decided to fight back against it in the only way she could think of. She started building a golem, a giant statue made from the dirt that she'd been getting Elgin to collect over the previous episodes. And now we finally understand why she needed so much of it and why it felt like such a specific and deliberate request rather than something random.